Welcome to my views and news. For several days, I've been thinking about doing a video on the issue of negotiations between Fano factions and Ethiopian federal government. If talks can be held between Tigray fighters and Ethiopian government, between Ola fighters and Ethiopian government, why is that there is no engagement? No constructive, comprehensive dialogue between Fano fighters, Fano factions, and Ethiopian federal government. What is the reason? So I want to share with you my analysis. What is the reason behind Ethiopian government's unwillingness to engage Fano factions at the table? Firstly, we'll have to start from analyzing other peace talks which have been held in Ethiopia recently. Why were talks between Tigray fighters and Ethiopian government held in Pretoria in Kenya? Talks were held because Tigray fighters were beginning to lose ground. Ethiopian military had military leverage. Tigray fighters were losing ground, and Ethiopian government realized that it was the right time for talks because TPLF was ready to make concessions. If you remember, before Pretoria deal, Debretsion said that TDF was a red line, no talks on TDF. And Getachew, Debretsion, others were saying that no talks until foreign forces, Amhara forces leave Volkait Raya. But you saw that talk started while Raya, Volkait were under the control of Amhara forces, Eritrean military. Tigray People Front agreed to disarmament, disbandment of Tigray Defense Force. So TPLF, Tigray fighters made several concessions. Why did they make concessions? Because they were unable to counter the effect of a 2-year-long siege. People were dying. So Tigray fighters, Tigray forces were finding it difficult to get public support. So they agreed to sit at the table and talks were held. And TPLF was accepted as a stakeholder by Ethiopian government. This point is very important, viewers. You talk to those only who you see, who you accept as stakeholders. TPLF was accepted as a stakeholder. That is why talks were held, and we saw that Pretoria deal was signed. After that, we saw start of peace talks in other regions of Ethiopia too. In Amhara, Agos were engaged by Amhara regional government, though talks could not produce results. In BG, a peace deal was signed. In Gambela, a peace deal was signed between Gambela fighters and Ethiopian government. Gambela regional government. In Oromia too, talks started between Ola, Oromo Liberation Army, and Ethiopian government representative. Talks were held in Zanzibar, Tanzania. Why were talks held in all the regions? Because there was international pressure. Ethiopian economy was in trouble. It was one of the reasons behind Ethiopian government's willingness to talk to Tigray fighters. Ethiopian economy was in dire straits. So PM Abiy's government was hoping to get a bailout package from the West, from US. That is why it agreed to sit at the table with TPLF. And after Pretoria deal, world powers, international community through IMF, World Bank asked Ethiopian government to talk to other armed factions in different regions of Ethiopia too. And that is why talks were held in BG, Amhara, Gambela, Oromia, though talks could not deliver in Oromia. So, in other parts of Ethiopia, not in Tigray. Talks were held because international pressure was exerted on Ethiopian government, and some groups in the regions realized that they were not in a position to continue a war if Tigray fighters with tanks, artillery pieces could not get desired results at the, on the ground. So how can these armed groups continue their armed struggle? So that is why they decided to sit at the table. Talks were held, and you saw that these fighters were given some concessions too. In Gambela, we saw that Gambela Liberation Front fighters, they are now being trained and they'll be part of Gambela regional police. In Amhara, why so far no talks between Ethiopian federal government or Amhara regional government and Fano fighters? Firstly, international pressure is missing. There was no mention of Amhara a few weeks ago in the statements of US State Department, etc. Just recently, US State Department, others, they started mentioning Amhara, that Ethiopian government should engage groups for dialogue in Amhara. Amhara was nowhere. The conflict in Amhara, it's a new conflict because it mainly started, though disarmament of Fano faction started last year. But when Ethiopian government decided to disband Amhara special force, that was the start. After that, Amhara anti-government resistance movement gained pace. Fano fighters got support from Amhara special force members, some ENDF members joined too. People took to the streets. There was start of clashes between Ethiopian National Defense Force and Fano fighters and locals. So that was the start. So it's a new development, a few months old, you can say. Now gradually, international community is realizing that a new security development is happening, a new development with national consequences is happening in the Amhara region. That is why we're starting to see mention of Amhara conflict in Amhara by Western powers. Gradually, pressure will be exerted on Ethiopian federal government to talk to Fano factions. Secondly, so there was no pressure. That is why no talks, but now gradually we could see pressure. Secondly, talks are held with those who are accepted as stakeholders. Is Ethiopian federal government ready to accept Fano factions as stakeholders in the Amhara region? It's a very important question, viewers, because once you sit at the table with a party, you have to give something to that party. Negotiations are all about give and take. The two sides make concessions and they get relief as well. So, is Ethiopian government ready to accept Fano factions as stakeholders in Amhara? The answer is no. So far, Ethiopian government does not see Fano factions as stakeholders. And by the way, Ethiopian government is in control in the Amhara in the form of Prosperity Party. Amhara PP is part of Prosperity Party. Amhara PP in power in Amhara region. Opposition party, part of the government, Nama, though some of its MPs keep on issuing statements, Christian Tradale, etc., criticizing the government. Basically, party head, Pretoria, is part of the government, is Minister of Innovation and Technology. So, there is no opposition basically in the Amhara region, no opposition at the parliament. Ethiopian government does not want to accept Fano factions as stakeholders in the Amhara region. Why? Because if they are accepted as stakeholders, talks are held, obviously Ethiopian government will have to give something to them. Very important point which is overlooked. And lastly, I personally think that Ethiopian government believes it can disband Fano factions, because the operation against Fano fighters was launched last year, and after that thousands of people were arrested, activists, journalists, Fano supporters, etc. We did not see any massive reaction against that. Reaction started this year when Amhara special force was disbanded mainly. So Ethiopian government believed, it still believes, I think, that it can disband Fano factions. That Fano factions are operating separately, one in Gajam, other in Gondar, then in Volo or Showa. So they can be handled. Why should the government create another stakeholder in the Amhara region? Government believes that through military operation, through security operation, these Fano factions can be completely eliminated or they can be made insignificant. Can it happen? That's another question. And will government review its analysis, its estimate of the strength of Fano factions? Because gradually we are seeing that Fano factions are gaining ground, they are gaining more support, they are strengthening themselves in terms of numbers, in terms of logistics as well. So Ethiopian government might review its estimate. So far, the estimate is that Fano factions are not hard to handle. Only problem is that people are supporting these Fano factions, so gradually a narrative will be built to isolate Fano factions. And the government believes that through targeted surgical operations, these Fano factions can be eliminated. By targeted surgical, I mean that the government wants to capture Fano leadership. If Fano leaders, if Fano commanders are captured, arrested or killed, this movement could be crushed. That is what is the estimate, I think. Is government underestimating Fano's capabilities in current situation in which we are seeing that ENDF members, former Amhara special force members are joining Fano factions, people supporting different Fano groups? We can speak about that too, but in later videos. Now, talks will only be held between Amhara, the armed faction, the Ethiopian federal government, if these factions are strong enough and Ethiopian government realizes that it will have to accept these armed factions as stakeholders, that government will have to give something, some political concessions, some powers, some authorities to these groups in the Amhara region. And secondly, talks will only be held after international pressure increases and Ethiopian government is forced to sit at the table with these Fano fighters. And one of the reasons behind the organization, new mobilization of armed factions in the Amhara region is that some groups in the Amhara region, they believe that they must make themselves, that they should be, they should do something that they are taken seriously by international community. And that is why they are organizing themselves, they are arming, they are building militias, because these groups in the Amhara region, they believe that international community took Tigray fighters seriously, OLA fighters seriously. Why? Because they were armed. They were thousands in number, and international community was forced to accept them as stakeholders in Ethiopia. So that is why we're seeing reorganization of Fano factions, and we have seen formation of Amhara Popular Front of Skandar Naga, which has a branch in diaspora as well, led by Daud, appointed by Skandar, announced his appointment by Skandar. So purpose is to mobilize diaspora, to engage international community, so that it should put pressure upon Ethiopian government to talk to Fano fighters and to accept Fano factions and Amhara opposition, armed opposition, as genuine stakeholders in the Amhara region. Let's see what happens. Thank you for watching.